If you are in a place that is safe and appropriate, please close your eyes and begin to take some nice, long, slow, deep, relaxing breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. With every inhale, feel more light and peace entering the body and mind. And with every exhale, feel like you're able to let go of everything that you do not want in your mind, along with all tensions in your body. We picture ourselves on top of a beautiful mountain in the center of a circular grove of trees. In the center of our circle, a bonfire blazes forth, lighting us and the grove with a sacred golden light. This is the light of perfect love and perfect trust, and it easily and efficiently burns away everything unlike itself, leaving us safe and serene. Into this sacred space, we invoke the presence of our Creator. To many of us, our Creator reveals themselves to be a mother and father, a goddess and God. We call upon our angels, our guides, our teachers. We ask that they join with us, guiding us along the way, helping us to become happier, more peaceful, more magical, and more loving people. Thank you very much. Blessed be. I always like to say there are no witch police. And the reason why that's such a powerful thing to remember is that the craft's bottom line law, is do what you will. Nobody anywhere has the ability to ultimately thwart you when it comes to your magic, when it comes to your craft, when it comes to your practice. You can be, do, have anything that you want in regards to your craft. That is exciting to know, but it's also a problem for many people because just because you can do something doesn't mean that it's effective to do something. So while it's true that nobody can tell you no, or as it says in our old Book of Shadows, no one may say you nay, just because nobody has the power or authority over you and your practice doesn't negate the fact that some things are going to be more effective than others. I liken it to fitness. If you do Pilates, you're going to be physically fit over time. You're going to build muscle. You're going to improve your posture. Your cardiovascular system will benefit from it. There's all kinds of wonderful things that are going to happen by learning how to do Pilates. And if you learn how to do Pilates in specific ways, you will get the most benefit out of it. And one of the best ways to learn how to do Pilates in those specific ways is to learn under the guidance of an experienced teacher. Now, you could pick up a book on Pilates and do a few things here and there, and maybe not get the same benefits, but you get possibly some benefits. But there's no Gestapo out there saying, no, you may not do that. If you decided you wanted to lift weights, you could also become physically fit. You could build muscle. There are some cardiovascular benefits from lifting weights, especially if you do it in certain ways. And your overall fitness will improve, especially if you are following particular principles. And one of the best ways to follow particular principles is to do it under the guidance and direction of a very well-trained trainer. That doesn't mean that you have to go with a particular trainer or not. You could pick up books on it or videos or read blogs and come up with your own routine. And depending on how well you've designed your own routine, you may get really great benefits out of it. You may not, depending on how you decide to do things. But still, there's no police out there saying you may not do this unless you are under the guidance of a particular trainer or whatever. If you think about your magical practice in a similar vein, you'll get the understanding of why there are no witch police. Now, on blogs and social media and things like that in regards to witchcraft, you get all kinds of people saying you must do this, you can't do that. And we get a lot of that. And very frequently, people will couch their questions to me about particular operations, etc. Can I blah, 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 blah? Am I allowed to da 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 da? People get sick of me responding in this way, but I will always respond in this way. You can do anything you want. However, if you're asking me, is it effective to do da 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 da? Then here's my opinion on that. But it's important for me to always make that point that you can do anything you want before I give my opinion, because the question wasn't asked in a way that is accurate. How we ask questions is very important. If you're asking, am I allowed to do such and such a thing? Of course you are. You're allowed to do anything you want. Somebody just today said, if I don't have the metals for the Kamea, can I just write the periodic table for the metal on the back of it? And I said, that's an interesting idea. You can do that if you want to. And my recommendation is give it a try and see how it works for you. I think it's kind of smart, actually, as a creative way of introducing the metal that I probably wouldn't have thought of on my own. So yeah, try it out and see if you like it. But even still, I had to start with the answer, you can do anything you want. How you ask somebody a question sometimes is very judgmental. Sometimes how you ask a question is very leading, is very manipulative. Sometimes the way we ask a question also shows our misunderstanding of a particular topic. And how we ask our questions about magic tells us a lot about where we are on our path. For instance, if you're working on some of the basics, like in a witch's primer, the grounding and centering, that's one of the first magical exercises we give you, grounding and centering. What does grounding do? It takes our personal energy and it connects it so that we feel like we are connected to the earth, and then balances the energy within ourselves so that we are not only connected to a power source that is greater than our own personal bodies have, but we are also balancing the energy within our bodies and within our auras. And the theory behind that is that when we work our magic, we aren't going to deplete our own energy, and we are coming from a very clear-minded perspective, so that our magic isn't tainted by a bunch of worry and a bunch of what they call negative thinking. Now, when people say, do I have to ground and center before I start magic? No, you don't have to do anything. In fact, if you want to try doing magic without grounding and centering, and then try magic with grounding and centering, you can experience that difference for yourself. You can ask yourself, now, how do I feel? What are my results when I ground and center first? And then how do I feel and what are my results when I don't ground and center first? And you can make a science experiment out of that. Same thing goes with the spirit guide meditations that we sometimes give when we are first learning how to practice witchcraft. My own path includes linking up to a consciousness that is wiser, more intelligent, and more all-knowing than my day-to-day consciousness is. In more technical terms, I would call that my superconscious mind versus my conscious mind. My conscious or my surface mind has very limited capability, but that's not the totality of my mind. So I link up with a superconscious part of my mind, and very frequently, in order to understand what that is, I will call it a spirit guide, or I will be open to it presenting itself to me in whatever form is most appropriate for me. And then I interact with that and I get my wisdom from that, rather than relying on my surface mind, which is mostly just an adding machine. The surface mind can bring us some results and some effects, but only based on what it already knows. Whereas the superconscious mind can introduce things into the conscious mind that the conscious mind didn't understand or didn't know about first. And then we have our deep mind, which is autonomic, below the surface, pre-verbal. A lot of times, one of the first things I give people is learning how to connect with their guide, their superconscious mind. And the reason I do that is so that they have then more autonomy. They don't have to rely on a teacher in the physical world for every little thing. They can also recognize that they have access to wisdom themselves. They have access to a higher knowledge themselves. You are autonomous in that you already are connected to infinite wisdom, infinite intelligence. And while it's helpful to have somebody like a trainer, if you're working on weightlifting, eventually you don't need that trainer. You understand the principles yourself, and it's nice to have a trainer there to check your form and stuff like that. You can be trusted to not injure yourself because you understand the principles. And the same thing goes with any kind of training in the craft. The best thing that you can expect from a training in the craft is learning how to access wisdom and power in a safe and reliable way. But what the ego does with that is it says, well, now what I need is a guru. I need to align myself with a particular system or a particular group of people because they know more than everybody else. Now, that's not to say that you can't spend time with a teacher or a group, or you find a home with a group of people, a coven and things like that, where that is your spiritual family. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's very different from thinking, I'm not enough. I don't have access to knowledge myself. I don't have access to wisdom myself. Therefore, I have to align myself with somebody who knows more than I do. That's an ego trick, to look outside of yourself into the world of form to find what you're seeking, rather than understanding that within you is the source of all of that. Maybe not always the source of the nuts and bolts data information, and that's a good thing that a teacher can bring you. They can show basic principles, but then what your own superconscious mind can do is take all of that and bring you to a new level that a physical teacher is not capable of bringing you to. You can learn something from a class or a teacher or a website or whatever. You can learn some techniques, but to be an adept, you have to move beyond those people, beyond those groups, beyond all of that. Even if you have your own coven, they aren't the source of your wisdom. The source of your wisdom is within you. And it's an infinite fountain of wisdom that's available for you. You don't need to look outside of yourself for that. And you don't need to justify your practice to anybody. The other day I was talking to somebody and they were very upset about things going on in their lives, and they felt like they weren't good enough in their practice. They maybe didn't meditate enough, or they took too much time off, and that's why these horrible things were happening to them. And I had to remind them, first of all, based on what they told me, I didn't see it as a bunch of horrible things happening to themselves at all. I saw it as them navigating their way through a very challenging situation successfully and getting to the other side of it. That's my perception of what I saw. And I said, what that says to me is that your spiritual practice carried you through those times that you were not capable of having a spiritual practice. In other words, you had done so much, laid such a groundwork, that when you were going through some of these challenging times and you just couldn't get yourself together to practice, it was fine, because all of the work you had done carried you through those times until you could start your practice again. Somebody else said, I don't know if I want to do this particular practice. I don't like this part of it or that part of it. And I said, you don't have to do it. Do the parts of it that make sense to you and omit the parts that don't make sense to you. Maybe you'll come back to them at another time, or maybe you won't. But you don't have to grin and bear it going through practices that don't align with you. You can always find an alternative way to get those things done. You don't have to toe the line necessarily. You have the freedom, the liberty to develop a practice that makes sense to you. I've given several other talks about developing a practice and what I recommend to be in those practices so that you get all your bases covered, and you can listen to those lectures. But how you cover those bases doesn't have to be done in a particular way. In fact, as you have more clarity about the connection that you have with your superconscious mind, with your spirit guide, with your inner guide, you'll probably develop ways that are so much better for you to cover those bases than anything that I could teach you or anybody else could teach you. When we stop putting teachers and celebrities and authors up on pedestals and recognize that maybe they have a little more experience than we do and we can learn from their experience, but we don't any longer put them on pedestals as being a substitute for our own superconscious minds, then all of a sudden our craft really opens up for us and we're not worried about whether it fits in a box. You don't need to accept these arbitrary limitations and labels. One of the things that the internet gives us is a glimpse into how the ego mind works, because you see how trendy things are on the internet. And when we stop following the trends, we're no longer bound to being stuck in this idea of, I'll never figure this out. I'll never be able to figure out how to do magic effectively, because every time I start to feel comfortable, then I read that I'm supposed to be doing this. Then I read that I'm supposed to be doing that. And that's just the witch police trying to make you feel bad about yourself, trying to make you feel like you're not good enough, trying to make themselves feel like they're smarter than you, more experienced than you, more wise than you. That's why when somebody asks a question to me, you're never going to hear me say, no, you can't do that. No, you can never do that. My point of view is that's not a part of my practice, but try it out and see how it works for you. Be a scientist about this. If it works, then do it again. If it doesn't work, then maybe eliminate it. Follow some basic magical principles, and the particular techniques, the particular aesthetic can change. It can change from day to day. It can change from week to week, year to year. I don't practice the craft in the same way that I did 20 years ago. I've evolved in certain ways, and I won't be practicing it in the same way in the next 10 years either. I have to evolve. But there's certain principles that have never ended. If you go back and listen to my very old lectures, the ones from the 80s, I don't speak necessarily the same way. I don't always use the same images, but the principles are pretty much identical. I haven't changed one little bit on the principles, but I've changed quite a bit on the way that those principles manifest for me. And that's how it should be. So when you're out there in the Wicca sphere, don't allow yourself to be intimidated. Don't allow anybody to give you the idea that you're not experienced enough, you're not smart enough, you don't know enough. Everybody's learning. Everybody's learning all kinds of stuff. You can't know it all. It's impossible. You can't know every bit of occult information. You can't know every little piece of data about the craft. For one thing, a lot of that data is seemingly contradictory. A lot of practices are seemingly contradictory. So you can't practice it all. You have to ask your own inner guide, what is my path right now? What is my highest form of practice? How can I get my needs met in a wonderful way? How can I contribute most to the world? How can I be a beacon of light for others? All of those kinds of questions are wonderful. And your superconscious mind will show you how, or your spirit guide, or whatever you're going to call it. Maybe you are into a pantheistic way of experiencing divinity. That's fabulous. To you, God might be the Olympian gods. That's what God reveals itself to be for you. And your practice is completely pantheistic and Greek. And that's what you want to explore. That's wonderful. And you can do that. And you can evolve out of that later if you want to. Maybe you are working with abstract principles. All you care about is the energies and you don't want to deify them. That's fine. You can do that. And that may evolve later or not. Maybe you're really into Satanism. That's your thing. And that is what makes sense to you. Do it. Go for it. If it's bringing you joy, if it's bringing you positive results, and it's making a positive difference in your life, then that's a good thing for you. And maybe you'll evolve out of that later. Maybe for you, being a witch is being a solitary practitioner, and you don't talk to anybody about it. That's fabulous. And you may evolve out of that later. Maybe your thing is you really want to be part of a community and you want a coven or whatever kind of witch community you want. You should do that. I remember back in the day when I was in my early 20s and I was really getting involved with the local community and I was building communities. That's all I wanted to do. I had a teacher. I was explaining what I wanted to do. And he said, if you want to be the big witch queen, you do it. If that's what's going to make you happy, you go be the big witch queen. And if you decide to retire from being the big witch queen, that's great too. And I remember that was so liberating to know that I can do what I want to do and then I can move beyond it later. I'm not stuck in some form of the craft that no longer makes sense to me, and neither are you. The way that you practice is going to look different and unique to you based on where you are right now. And you will use as many teachers in the physical world as you need to in order to get the data that you might not be able to access solely with your superconscious mind. But ultimately, your goal is not to stay involved with feeling like you are mentoring with anybody in the physical world as much as you are mentoring with that inner guide that will always be there and will always show you where to go, what to do, how to get there, how to be, all of that. And that, to me, is the most important part of anybody's practice, asking and being willing to receive the answers from that part of the mind, which already knows everything. You can call it anything you want and it will respond because it's part of your own mind. And it's the part of your own mind that most people don't know is there. The only part of their mind that they understand is their own personality and their day-to-day workings with things in the physical world. There is a greater part of your mind that is a true extension and expression of divinity. And no two souls are alike. So therefore, no two witchcraft practices can be alike. As much as you want to learn from people in the physical world, eventually you're going to have to go beyond that because nobody can show you what your true expression is except for your own inner guide. So it's up to you to take your power and own it and use people like me, authors or lecturers and things like that to your benefit, to learn techniques, to learn tools, to learn to understand some of the intricacies of the craft that maybe you're not privy to yet. But that's just a starting point. Don't turn any of us into gurus because that's not our function. Although some people want it to be their function. Some people will encourage it, but I'm not one of them. I'm not one of those people, and I don't want you to ever fall prey to those people because they're out there, and you won't fall prey to those people if you understand that your power is your own and how you practice is your own. And you don't owe anybody any explanations. You don't have to justify yourself, and you don't have to share anything with anybody that you don't feel like sharing. Nobody can make you or force you to do, be, or practice anything in the craft other than what you say. Your will is the only thing that's important. And what you will to do is up to you. And you have ultimate freedom. Do what you will. And you know that whole "and it harm none, do what you will"? The reason why that one doesn't work for me, not that I expect everybody to go out harming people. The reason why that doesn't work for me is because it starts out with a rule of what you can't do. And so already it's off the mark. If you're doing what you will, if you are really doing what you will, what your soul is expressing itself to be, and what your superconscious mind is guiding you to be, do, and have, harming somebody isn't even on the docket as a possibility. Harming somebody is not what you're after. You're after your own power, your own wisdom, your own truth, your own becoming, your own reconnection with the truth. If everybody is involved with their true will, then there is no harming because everybody fits in their right place. That's what's called the divine design. It all fits together perfectly. It's when we're off of our divine design, it's when we're not doing our will that we start hurting each other. So don't think that you have to add that qualifier, do what you will and it harm none, because that's not the law. The one and only law in the craft is do what you will. So you have to find out what your will is and do it. Remind yourself frequently that your craft is your own. Your practice is your own. Your power is your own. And your guidance comes from within you, ultimately. And you will never fail. You will never fail to grow in power. You will never fail to be successful in your magic. And you'll get better and better results as you learn how to practice the principles that are taught to you in the way that makes the most sense to you. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. Until next time, blessed be.